Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for being here today. Welcome to the Design for Data webinar. This session is sponsored by Group Visual IO. My name is Emily True, and I work with Mark at Group Visual IO. So I'll just give everybody a minute to get into the webinar. I see people are loading up. It's great. So if you're here, you're probably working in IoT or you may be interested in IoT. And what we're going to talk about today is what makes a successful IoT product. So what are some of the key factors to success in the IoT marketplace? What kind of innovation are we seeing at the intersection of user experience design and Internet of Things technology? And we're also going to look at some examples of companies who have done well and maybe some who have struggled in this space. And after the presentation, keep in mind that we're doing a live Q&A, so please submit your questions using the questions panel. It's in your GoToWebinar interface on the right-hand side. And we'll get to as many of those questions as we can after the presentation. But you'll also get an email after this webinar with a link to the recording, and you'll also access a survey that only takes about 2 minutes, and you'll have the opportunity within that survey to send us more questions if we don't get to them in this session. So in the room with me, I have Mark Schindler. Mark is the Managing Director of Group Visual IO, and we're a design services firm based in Cambridge, Mass. So we specialize in UI, UX, and data viz design for digital products. So this topic is very near and dear to us. And also with me is David Rose. David is the author of the very popular book, Enchanted Objects. If you have not read this book yet, I would highly recommend. If you're in this session today, you need to read this book. So without further ado, I'll let Mark and David get started. Thank you both so much for being here.
What a nice plug, Emily. Thanks, Emily.
So Mark here. I love the IoT space. There's so many interesting challenges for a designer in this space. Some of you may know that my background is in architecture, the traditional architecture, the design of buildings and public spaces. And IoT engages a lot of the things that architects think about, elements of the physical world, human needs and goals, and even gets into some of the emotional and what we might call softer factors. I'm very excited to have my good friend David with us today. He's done a number of startups in the IoT space, and as Emily mentioned, he was instrumental in introducing many people to even the term IoT in his book Enchanted Objects. And I would definitely say, second what Emily said, if you haven't read it, definitely should. It's a great overview, actually really an inspiring look at this world of connected devices and what it means for us as human beings. David also has deep connections to architecture, having taught for a number of years at the Graduate School of Design at Harvard. So what is the IoT, Internet of Things? It may seem obvious. A device, maybe a set of devices that are connected to each other and to a network that has some kind of intelligence built into it. It's designed to help people accomplish some useful tasks. And increasingly, products are able to leverage the intelligence of the group, of the network. Paired, say, with some machine learning, as one device learns, other devices on the network can leverage that learning and intelligence as well. I think it's probably fair to say that all digital products coming to market these days have some kind of intelligence built in, and many have connectivity as well. I think really no product category, traditional products included, really exists without some connected SKU within that space. Why is that? Well, for one thing, the economics has enabled it. The cost of sensors and other intelligence has gone way down. For example, the cost to embed Wi-Fi into your product maybe just a few years ago was probably more than $200. Now it's less than $2. So now you can put intelligence into even very inexpensive consumer products like a toothbrush or a hairbrush. So how does IoT come into our products and our lives? One way that we can think about connectivity is as a new material, not unlike glass or titanium or some kind of polymer that you can incorporate into any traditional product. So consider the luggage market. I read an article last summer in Wired magazine that compared and reviewed more than half a dozen smart suitcases. A suitcase may seem like kind of a silly thing to put intelligence and connectivity into, but a lot can happen to a suitcase when you travel. You can get lost and get damaged, and the inconvenience factors can be significant. So they're actually valuable problems to solve in that space. Manufacturer like Rimowa, which is a German luggage manufacturer, make a high-end product, they might be thinking, how do you continue to demand a premium for your product in this space? So maybe thinking along these lines, they released what's called an e-tag a few years ago. It's a connected suitcase. It takes online check-in one step further. So we can all check into our flights with an app or online. What the e-tag lets you do is that it syncs with your airline's app. I think it supports Lufthansa, maybe a few other airlines right now, and they're adding more. And it lets you check your bag from home. So the tag appears on this e-ink panel. If you can see where my cursor is, just to the left of the handle is this thing that looks just like a luggage tag, but what that is actually electronic ink. So it's actually part of the suitcase. And then when you get to the airport, you just drop your bag and go on your way. And then what's nice is that it lets you know when the bag is stowed in the cargo hold. So it's nice to know that your bag is actually traveling with you.
Or someone else has carried it away.
Could be.
I wonder what the price point on that is. Because their luggage is already incredibly expensive. So I wonder if they're able to rationalize like another few $100s for the cost of a $2 e-ink display.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is more than $1,000. So it's an investment because you hope there's an upgrade path, right? So some cool devices in this space, but there are also challenges with all the opportunities. And I think talking to a lot of people that we work with in the IoT space, as well as other folks in the area, I think they're all dealing with some kind of complexity. I think there's sort of the obvious ones, which have to do with device challenges, managing devices, getting them registered on the network, connectivity, making sure the batteries are working, those kinds of things. But I think increasingly, people are seeing complexity around just the fact that you have multiple different people, human beings that are involved with these devices, and maybe multiple devices in various combinations. So you might have a consumer that's trying to use the device or to use the app, and then maybe there's a management side to it, someone who's actually tracking and supporting the product. There are also could be multiple interaction points. A device itself might have a UI. Maybe there's one or more mobile apps that are managing it, some kind of web portal to interact with. And I think that brings a challenge to maintain a consistent and unified experience across all these touch points. There's also real world scenarios. So it may be just the physical aspects of putting devices out there in an environment that's hot or cold or wet or dusty. But then there's challenging human factors. There's one client that we work with that has a product that goes into a special needs classroom. And what it does is it alerts a teacher when one of the students is about to have a meltdown. So giving that advance warning is actually a really valuable use case. But you can imagine that teachers and teacher aides in that environment are already dealing with a lot of challenges, trying to just keep everything together, starting to introduce an app and maybe one or more physical devices that may be uncomfortable for people to wear. It can easily put things over the top.
And for a meltdown, it probably has to be totally indestructible too, so the kid can't like smash it.
Exactly, another physical factor. So right. I think it all comes together. So maybe I'll pass off to David. And I think you're going to take us through a case study maybe about one of the IoT devices that you brought to market.
Yeah, so I wanted to take you through a case study of what seems to be a super simple device, which is an internet-connected pill cap. But it has a lot of interesting complexity that sort of comes from the fact that it's connected to the cloud. So when we started, this was a company that we founded called Vitality. We learned that there are 3.5 billion amber pill vials that are distributed in the US every year. So it's just a big, big opportunity, and that half of us are prescribed something that we're supposed to take every day, and we take it about half of the time. So it's a huge loss in terms of pharma revenue, in terms of revenue to insurance companies, like $300 billion of hospitalizations that you wouldn't have to have if you took your medication on time. And then there's also just the loss to human health and productivity because you're not taking the meds that you need to take. So so if you think about this in terms of feedback loops, the fact that a pill cap is connected to the internet, you can spin up a bunch of these little feedback loops. So you can do things like personal reminders, so it can text you so you don't forget. Another thing we can do is we can include a non-professional caregiver, so somebody who knows and loves you and wants to support you. So there can be another social support feedback loop, which is really motivating for a lot of people. A third feedback loop is a refill feedback loop. So you can think about the pharmacy wants to help you refill as seamlessly as possible. And the last one is a professional accountability feedback loop. So if you have a new liver or a new kidney, the transplant doc wants to know that you're taking your immunosuppressant so you don't reject the kidney. So all four of these are opt-in feedback loops. And when we thought about sort of how the data should be presented, in which modality for each of these stakeholders, the answer was different. So different frequency and different modality. So in case one, it's text message or phone call. In case two, it's a weekly email. In the third case, it's just data that goes into the pharmacy refill system. And in the fourth case, it's integration with electronic medical record. So all four of those are sort of complex, even for just a device that's so simple that just has a simple switch on top. So one of the data visualizations that we did was to look at how do people in a normal population take their medication. So this is a chart that shows days going from left to right and people, and pink means they didn't open the cap that day. So this is what normal looks like in our control group. And then when we turn all these services, these 4 feedback loops on, you get to see like, wow, a huge difference in how often people take medications. So that was our own internal view of the data. But now let's look at, go ahead, sort of how the cap gets into people's hands. So we thought about this as not something you would buy, but instead it has an indigenous business model, a built-in business model. The pharmas are selling more meds and the insurance companies are being saved money. So this should just be standard medication packaging. So it's just given to you by the pharmacist. And she says, oh, lucky you get one of these smart caps, go ahead. And then the setup experience we tried to make as incredibly easy as possible. So all you have to do when you get home is plug in a nightlight. Most people are comfortable with that. But we decided not to tell them it's a cellular modem and it runs off a 3G network because that just sort of complexifies the problem. So we instead said, put the nightlight sort of where you keep your meds, and that was how the data flows up and down to the cloud.
Yeah, nice. I mean, that's attention management. Just saying, just a simple workflow, don't have to do too many things to get things connected.
Right. So that's sort of the user experience. And then the cap can be made very cheap because we sort of push, from an architectural perspective, we push all the costs into the nightlight for the connectivity and for the cellular modem. And so every day it flashes or pulses with lights and then can do its thing, and multiple caps. So if you forget, you might get called on the cell phone. And then this is a picture of the report that a loved one might get via an email. So it shows you which days you did or didn't take your meds. And then we did a printed report because our customer said, my folks don't feel comfortable with looking at complex email. They would just like to get a monthly printed report. So we shouldn't forget about print as a powerful medium for IoT visualization. So again, there's, the same super simple object can have multiple views of this data and multiple content that goes alongside the views. So we put in details about someone's health condition, why they're taking their medication, how long it might take to see the benefits of antidepressant medication, which you don't feel the benefits of for a couple of weeks. So we try to sort of put content next to what you're doing there. And then for the doctor, we thought, well, doctors really want to see how they're doing versus other doctors. So for the doctor themselves, they have a comparison against other doctors. And for the brand manager at the pharmaceutical company, they get another view of the data. And then the transplant center wants their own view of the data, and then the brand manager wants their own view of the data. So lots of things, lots of data to visualize because you have all these smart caps in the world that are all casting off this information every day.
It's amazing, really. So just one cap generates, there's like more than half a dozen different stakeholders.
Different views. Yeah. That's right.
Great. So we've been talking about design, user experience. Maybe it's worth pausing for a moment to define what UX, user experience, means in this context. Because UX, UI, they're kind of buzzwords that we all hear. Sometimes they seem to be used interchangeably. Well, I think I would suggest that UX is not just the user interface of an app. Considered broadly, it's really all the ways that someone can come into contact and experience your product. There are many touch points to it. And when you think about it in this way as a life cycle, it actually starts even before you start using the product at all. Maybe you're shopping for a product, you go online, maybe you try out a demo of it, you watch some videos, and then maybe say, you buy it. If it's a physical device, it gets shipped to your house. And then there's the experience of opening it up, maybe assembling it, preparing it for the first time you use it. And then maybe the first time you use the product, it walks you through a little tutorial. And then after you've been using it for a while, It kind of knows your preferences. It's got your data loaded into it. And at that point, I think your experience evolves and changes. Each one of those is a different quality of experience. Then ultimately, maybe you get to the point where you don't need the product anymore, or it's time to upgrade. So that kind of completes the life cycle. So ideally, you want that to continue forward. And when you think for an example, think about how Apple Computer manages the experience of taking your product, what's an iPhone or a computer, out of the box. It comes in this lovely white box, and everything is well thought through, like the tabs that make it easy to pull it out. Everything about that experience, even though it's not using the product itself, it speaks to the value and the quality of the brand and the product. So
sometimes we call that the Christmas morning experience, the New Year's Day experience, and the Valentine's Day experience. Sort of trying to mark this is how you first experience, and then a few days in, and then a few months in.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to look at it. I mean, I think thinking about it as something that you really want to enjoy every time you touch the product, whatever that interaction is. So what makes a successful user experience for an IoT product, or maybe really for any product? So you may be familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow developed this in the 1940s and 1950s, and he expressed it as a pyramid with basic human needs like food, water, shelter at the bottom of the pyramid. And the premise was that you kind of need to satisfy those needs first before you start to satisfy higher level needs and desires. Up at the top is self-actualization and maybe self-transcendence. So maybe we think about
Nirvana.
Yeah. So if we can get IoT to Nirvana, that's fantastic. But we can think about IoT products in a similar way, because frankly, they do address a broad range of use cases. From very functional, tactical, industrial use cases to ones that are really more aspirational. So maybe starting at the bottom, thinking about the basic needs, I think you want to make sure that your experience of the product is worthwhile. It's solving a valuable problem. Maybe it enables some important opportunity for you. And then moving up to trustworthy. You want it to be dependable, durable, make sure that it scales with the way that you use it. And then thinking about seamless. Don't worry about the clunkiness of connecting it to a network. I think the example that David just showed is a really nice example where you plug in a nightlight and it kind of seamlessly does whatever it needs to do behind the scenes. You don't have to really participate necessarily or manage that experience. And it's all accomplished very smoothly. But there's another concept of seamless, which is that it connects effortlessly to the way that you live, to your lifestyle. And maybe it only requests or requires your attention when it's appropriate. As we get towards the top of this pyramid, we get to the concept of a device that's insightful. Insightful doesn't just mean that it gives you useful information, although that's important. I think another thing to think about is what is the mental model of a product. You want it to be clear and intuitive. And frankly, it's not always that easy to help people understand what a product is and what it can do, because many devices these days are hybrids of traditional products. I think that when you put intelligence into a traditional product, sometimes that invokes a new category that didn't really exist before. And that can cause confusion. So for example, is that smart teddy bear a children's toy that just happens to have a microphone and speaker built into it? Or is it actually a voice recorder that just happens to be wrapped in the form factor of a plush toy? And if people don't understand what something is or what it's telling them, they're going to have a hard time trusting it. And we're going to talk a little more about trust later in this webinar. So up at the top of the pyramid is seductive. You want to make sure that people want and desire to use your product. You want it to be a Valentine's Day experience every time you use it, not just a functional appliance. You want it to be appealing and engaging. So let's look at a few examples. So what makes something worthwhile? TempAlert is a Boston area company that we work with. They're in the industrial IoT space. So their product solves a very valuable problem of making sure that expensive perishables don't go bad and people don't get sick from eating unsafe food. They work with pharmacies, restaurants, and other food service operation. And their product, which is a smart temperature sensor, makes sure that refrigerator cases, walk-in freezers, food warmers, things like that are all at the proper temperature and tells you if something's going wrong. And it's a worthwhile problem for sure. So think about a pharmacy that has a refrigerator full of vaccines that are maybe worth $40,000 or $50,000 and that need to be kept cold. The power goes out or a chiller fails, that could result in the loss of a lot of product, not to mention the inconvenience or maybe the health risk to their customers. So TempAlert, worthwhile, solves a very valuable business problem.
Can I talk about trustworthy?
You can.
So Sprouts.io is a company that makes a
a pot for putting a seed pot in, and then it grows your basil or your lettuce or your pot or whatever you want from the comfort of your own countertop. And one of the things that's sort of magical about this is not only does that stalk shed the right amount of light, but there's also a camera embedded, so it can sort of take perfect care of your plant. It has a very patient eye that's just only job in life is to sit there and look at your basil. But what they do to make it more trustworthy, I mean, plants still take weeks to grow, and you can still, like, how do you know that you've done all the right things, that it's doing the right thing? So it shows you literally the growth path of your plants over time. So you trust it that that your child is your basil is growing at the right pace and is as large as it will promise to be in this picture. So I think somehow getting you a sense of where you are on a maturation path or a growth path sort of inspires confidence.
Yeah, I really want to get one of these because I travel a lot. I know you do too, David, but I have a lot of backlog of houseplant guilt that maybe this can help me address.
I've been very good at killing plants.
So Seamless. You may know about, maybe familiar with this product, Tile. It's a cute chip that you can attach to your keychain or maybe to your dog's collar. And it makes sure that if something gets misplaced, you can track it down. The nice thing about it is that it actually really doesn't do much of anything at all. It doesn't have to do much until you actually need it. So when you really want it, though, it takes care of your problem for you. It helps you find your whatever it is you're looking for. And it works seamlessly with things that are important to you and that you really wouldn't want to lose: your dogs, your keys, maybe your wallet.
I think the seamlessness for this is really an industrial design problem, right? Something that's sort of small enough that it fits on a keychain or on a dog's collar, or is thin enough to slip into your wallet. Like, I have one in my wallet here, and I just forget the fact that I have it, which is really what it wants to be, right? It wants to be something that's just so seamless that it's forgettable until you lose your wallet.
I think it's great. I mean, it does its job without you even having to think about it at all.
That's right.
So it's nice. Insightful. So Sense Energy is a company that has a device that connects to your electric panel in your house, and you have one of these, right, David?
I do, yeah. If you go to the next slide, you can see more sort of what it looks like. So it has these two clamps, which are ammeters, which measure current out of your electrical box. And so that's the source of the data, is your electrical box. And then they visualize the data in a couple of interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. I just want to back up for a moment because I think this is actually interesting to see, even though I'm not sure that this gets exposed to like the homeowner or user, but it kind of illustrates, I mean, this is sort of the raw data, the view of it. And if we didn't have those little labels, it'd be very hard to tell what's going on. But to me, it illustrates kind of the design challenge sometimes. Just showing raw data doesn't really guarantee any kind of insights. But I think I think their algorithm, at Sense, does a nice job of turning them into these bubbles, so you can see that, okay, your toaster oven is kind of using a lot of electricity right now. So maybe it's time to kind of consider the virtues of untoasted bread, or maybe time to get a more energy efficient toaster oven.
Yeah, I really like the bubble diagram. I think my criticism of this, though, is that it gives you insights if you go into the app. It doesn't give you sort of ambient glanceability, which is what we learned in ambient devices, where you really want to make this information something that's really unavoidable in order to change people's behavior, not something where you have to dip into an app.
So it kind of depends on you to say, oh, what's using electricity?
Yeah.
Then you get the view.
Right.
But from that perspective, it actually, even though it's a pretty simple visualization, I would say it's actionable insights, because you see what it is, and you can presumably do something about it.
Right. You can tell your wife not to take long showers.
Stop toasting that bread. All right, so there are also products that highlight the challenges in this space. So some of you may be familiar with the Microsoft Band 2. This is a product that came out a few years ago. It's a Fitbit type fitness tracker, so it can measure steps and pulse rate and things like that. And from all accounts, the technology itself was actually quite good. But I think the problem that they had was more around the mental model. So I think people had a hard time figuring out what it was really designed to do. You can see, if you see where my cursor is, there's a logo for Starbucks. So presumably you could use it to, I don't know, order your coffee or something like that. And you could also download workouts from Gold's Gym. It sort of got to be like the whole kitchen sink thing, like throw more functionality in there, more people are gonna. It's a little bit of like try to be all things to all people. And I think that people struggle to really understand what it was best at. And you can see the verdict from Verge. They called it an identity crisis on your wrist. I mean, they had other problems too. I think they had some product quality issues. But in the end, Microsoft ended up pulling the product from the market after a year or two. It was unfortunate and expensive product failure. So it doesn't mean that it's always easy to accomplish this. Want to talk about the robots?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so what about seductive? So Jibo, in the bottom right, it's this cute robot. It can read bedtime stories to your child and do other engaging things. It's kind of like, think of it like an Amazon Echo, but with more personality. It kind of looks at you when you talk to it. I think it can like tilt its head or nod its head to gives a sense that it's understanding what you're saying to it. And there are other cute robots in this space, Curry, Toy Mail. Now, I think when you get to products that are so much more seductive than, say, an iPad, the appeal may actually be the key to its success. But things can frankly get, I would say, a little bit controversial in this space because what's cute and charming to one person may be a little annoying to somebody else. And maybe not all parents are going to think that this is the ideal companion for their kids. So I think what I would suggest is that with the promise of deeper personal connection, it kind of raises, I would say, almost cultural questions about how we relate to these clever and charming devices. So I think talking about this, one common issue that all IoT products and services face is who's driving the interaction. Are these just tools? Are these tools just remote controls for humans to use, or are we trusting these algorithms to make good decisions on our behalf? And if they're steering or regulating the temperature or shedding the right amount of artificial sunlight on our basil plant, do they even need us anymore? So David, do you want to take us through a consideration of like, where are we as humans?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the biggest interesting questions I think for AI right now is, are they black boxes that sort of run on their own without us, or are we in the loop, and how much are we in the loop? So consider this consider the lowly thermostat, the simple thermostat. The first iteration of this is we are in the loop because we're just turning it ourselves. Then what Nest brought to the market was a thermostat that has a proximity sensor and can guess that no one's around. So it can take the first step in smart thermostatness, which is to turn your heat or air conditioning off when you're not around. So that's, I think that was the sort of first step towards independence. And if you go,
the basil plant might not like that.
That's right. And I think that we are insist on being first as a member of this feedback loop, but gradually we're willing to step aside if and only if we understand the mental model that it's using in order to make decisions. So one of the most critical views of Nest is the one on the right, which is the schedule view, which it will populate on its own based on when it observes you being around or not being around. But to be able to look at and manipulate this view is really important, to be able to sort of see the mind of the machine and be able to say, well, I may not be here. I may go to bed later than you expected, but I still want it to be warm even after that, or some other way. So I think this is really critical to having you trust something, is to really see how to share its mental model. And let's take another example, which is not a thermostat, but something that's much more critical to your ability to drive it. And that's the Tesla interface. So the first version before autopilot came out was this, in the center of the console was this big radial display that you see here, which spends most of the screen real estate showing you how fast you're driving, as it is on most cars, or also how much energy you're using. So the right half of the display was used to show is it costing you kilowatts right now because you're accelerating like a madman, or are you recouping energy into the battery? So that was what they used the screen real estate for. But if you go to the next view, you can see that once autopilot came out, a new design seemed imperative, because now you really wanted people to know, what does the car see? So for you to engage autopilot, that little blue steering wheel in the top right, you need to understand, oh, it does see the car in front of me,
and it does see the lane lines clearly or not clearly, which is what it's using in order to grab the steering wheel and steer for you. And it does know what the speed limit is. And it does see a couple of other cars coming up. So it's interesting to me that they use all of the screen real estate to show you the mind of the machine just for the purpose of trust.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to be driving 75 miles an hour, you have to know what it sees. Otherwise, you don't want to take your hands off the wheel. So this is sort of, to me, is a really interesting example of human in the loop and for the purpose of trust, for like a pretty mission critical thing. If you go to the next slide, you can sort of see these are all of the ways that it's spending the screen real estate that it has to show you. And the most important thing actually on this chart is the blue lines, which represent the lane lines. Because in Boston, all the time, the paint guy, where's the paint guy? There's no lane line. And so if it fails to see the lane line and there's nobody driving in front of you for it to follow, then immediately it sort of and go to the next slide, sort of demands it puts up this sign like auto steer unavailable, or it will prompt you to grab the wheel. And then interestingly, so this is sort of the fourth point, which is we always want the ability to have a conversation with the system to adjust its logic, like on the Nest. And the interesting question is, well, should that conversation be initiated by you saying, wait a second, what do you believe about me again? Or maybe in the case of the Tesla, it's initiated by the car saying, you need to do something, right? I need your help right now. So I think this is sort of a brand new design challenge to figure out which way that conversation goes. And it's interesting in the Tesla that if you don't have the conversation, if you don't respond to it, it punishes you by turning itself off until the next time you stop.
So it has ways of getting your attention in that conversation.
Well, and penalizing you if you're not responding, which is an interesting design choice.
Yeah,
sort of a pedantic parental design choice.
Yeah. No, but that's a great example of sort of exposing the machine intelligence so you can respond to it. I think that's terrific. So the IoT space encompasses a wide range of user scenarios, as we're starting to see. So anything from consumer to enterprise, industrial. There's also anything from high touch to, frankly, no touch. I mean, there are many industrial IoT products who you actually never even really come into contact or even see the device at all. You're just exposed to it through some other mediated interface, like an app or some web application. But I think some things that are worthwhile to think about as people think about bringing products into the space, as David was just saying, what level of autonomy do you want your product to have? And then if there's going to be a conversation, who should drive that interaction? So looking at this grid, it's really where should your product fit? So this chart delineates a space of interaction. So along the vertical axis from top to bottom is what we're calling action, sort of from manual at the bottom to more autonomous at the top. So, up towards the top, you see Nest, which after it learns your preferences and how you like to set your temperature, it presumably can kind of do that more or less on its own in an autonomous way. And as we've seen, Tesla can go into self-driving mode as well, or you can put it into self-driving mode. Now, the horizontal axis from left to right is what we're calling conversational style. So as you can hear, we're suggesting that you think of your product as having having the potential anyways to have a conversation with a human being. So products that are over towards the left are more like, as David was saying about sense, it's kind of predominantly waiting for a human to initiate that contact, whereas products on the right, like Jibo, which can actually start talking to you and actually initiate that conversation, more as a device initiated mode. But I think what's interesting about this is that many products range across different areas in different scenarios or at different times. So you think about the Philips Hue, which is a smart light bulb, and you can use an app manually, let's say, to change, to turn the light on or off, or to change the color of it. But you can also automate it based on certain conditions. So you can maybe have it turn off or on at different times of the day. Maybe it turns color based on what the temperature is outside. So it can kind of move basically left to right and top to bottom within this chart.
I think probably in general, everything's moving up and to the right.
I
You know,
totally
like
agree.
yeah. But based on hopefully deep understanding of needs and context.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that I mean, the example that you showed with Tesla is that there needs to be a way for a human being to kind of pull it back from the upper right, maybe further down in here to take back control. So I think the question to ask is, what range do you want your product to have as you think about this space? So there's a new challenge that's, I think, starting to emerge for designers, and it's not just dealing with a single device, a single use case, but it's really multiple use cases, diverse apps, maybe even coming from different manufacturers that are brought together into what we might call an ecosystem of products that address more complex situations that require devices to talk more to each other. And you start to see the big players, Apple, Google, Amazon, Samsung, and others trying to get into this position to actually control how all these pieces are knit together. And I can speak from my own personal experience. I tried to, a little while ago, to connect a light bulb to my Amazon Echo so I can say, hey, Alexa, turn on the living room light. It was pretty complicated to get that to happen. It involved a lot of pieces. I have so there's the Echo, I have a Wink hub, I had a Belkin smart switch. I was using Hughes for some of the lights, and then I was using if this then that to create some recipes to try to make all those things work together. So I think a lot of apps, devices, and platforms, even to accomplish something, I would say it's pretty simple. And then this slide, I think, kind of focuses on the ecosystem in the home primarily, but I think we're also, and I'm hearing this in conversations with folks in other markets, we're seeing similar dynamics arise in other niche and industrial markets as well. Really, any device ecosystem that involves multiple devices, multiple players. So let's see. So David, I think you're going to take us through an example.
Yeah. So one of these ecosystems. This was a piece of work that Mark and I did together, also for the pill cap company called Vitality, and we were trying to think about across the multiple inputs that you can now sense about people's health. How might you take all of that information and try to consolidate it into a single view that's intelligible, where, if you have this huge confederacy of devices that are tracking the medications you take, aspects of activity, the kind of food you're eating, the mood and stress you're experiencing throughout the day, and how you're sleeping at night, like how do you take all of this data, which is all now siloed in separate apps, and try to bring it together in one sort of view of well-being? If you look, this is just a single app for sleep. This is the EM Fit app. So this is a little bean that goes underneath your mattress. What's the fairy tale again about the mattress?
Princess and the Pea.
Oh, the pea. Yeah, it's sort of a pea. It's a long flat pea. It's a pad that goes underneath the mattress.
Squished pea.
That's right. And it senses, even under the mattress, respiration and heart rate variability to try to give you this huge sets of data about sleep. So even just this one app has a pretty complex interface that no one really wants to look at every single morning. So our design challenge was, how do you take all of these disparate data and combine them all into maybe one number that helps you track over time this single vitality score? So you and I worked together on thinking about, well, how could you make that into a little glyph that reduces nicely down in a sort of iconified way that still allows you to understand the component parts, but then there's something, go ahead to the next one, where you can really see a score that persists over time. We sort of took a page out of Tufte's book here to say, let's show you a lot of data in the past, but sort of compress it as you go more and more to the past, to the left, but still show you how you're trending, and more detail as you go to the right, and even into the future, like what's a good thing to aim for and why, like what are the benefits and what are the risks if you don't get over or above that improvement line. So another one of our design principles here was just like with the glow cap, we knew that people are motivated by seeing where they fall in social distribution. So if you're Peter and your currently vitality score is 5.3, you really want to see like how you're doing compared to a network, and some specific data points are, these are some people like Jenkins that you should encourage who need your help, or other people in your social network that you know that you should congratulate because they're actually doing better than you are. But seeing where you fall in this distribution is very motivating for people. We also sort of took a page, I think this was an idea that came from the inner game of tennis, where they say that there's a coaching style which involves don't tell people everything that they're doing wrong, but just give people one idea at a time. So our idea for what was you would have a focus of the week to say, like, don't worry about your sleep and your stress or whatever, like just worry about this one thing for this period of time. Like just for this week, we want to try to go from 35% of your step goal to 60% of your step goal. And, you know, and people tend to improve much better if you can focus sort of the spotlight of their own attention on one thing at a time. Another idea we tried to incorporate was this idea of not having a lot of numbers. Like that previous graphic that we just showed had a lot of numbers, but to try to sort of reduce that into patterns or trends that would give people a real sense of what their activity is. So we designed these shark teeth visualizations, which is a cumulative, when did you get your steps? So it shows you, the dot shows you the cumulative, what you got at the end of the day, but the shape, whether it's concave up or concave down, shows you whether you got most of the steps at the end of the day or most of the steps at the beginning of the day. So you can really start to squint at the shape of these shark's teeth in order to see, like, when during the progress of the day are you getting your behavior. Another thing another idea came from, I think this was from flying in small planes. Like they had a glide path into the landing. So don't just tell people you need to get them from 150 down to 145 pounds. Instead, sort of show them a subtle, like a smooth path towards that goal. Another thing we were doing was also to try to make these little, these are taken from stock charts, I think, sort of like, they're called candlestick charts, to try to give people a sense of a lot of data about when people got different types of sleep, deep sleep, light sleep, REM sleep, all sort of compressed into this candlestick so you could really glance at and see trends across time. So taken together, we tried to make a 2-page printed report that would show all this data for all those 5 variables that we talked about and include this idea of social incentives, of showing the trends of this over time, of giving somebody a focus on the week. Go ahead. And the second page really was the biggest, sort of most profound idea I thought in the whole thing was this notion that this leads to that, leads to that. Because all of this behavioral data cascades in positive and negative ways. So if you have a couple nights of not enough activity, that might cascade into stress, which cascades into bad sleep, which cascades into bad eating, which cascades into, you know, I mean, all of these things cascade. And that's one of the perches that you're able to have if you know what the device, what this multiple device data looks like. Now you can really start to have insights across behaviors, and we were trying to capture that in one simple chart.
Yeah, I mean, there's really a lot going on here because there may be a lot of things that are kind of creating a kind of almost like a data syndrome, but reducing it down to, okay, but understand that, but as far as action goes, just focus on getting those 4 steps this week, and then we'll talk about something else next week. So very nice.
I think this is an opportunity for almost any company who exists inside of an ecosystem of devices to be the person who can aggregate your peers and partners' data and then consolidate it into this really intelligible, understandable, insightful view. You know, somebody's gonna be that center of gravity in the ecosystem, and it might as well be you.
Yeah, so that's the opportunity, definitely. So we talked about the UX lifecycle earlier. I think ideally, obviously, you want to have a positive experience for your users. You want to have seamless, easy onboarding, so people get oriented to the mental model. They understand what the product is, what it can do for you, and then over time, you want to make sure that people stay engaged. It's useful. It's solving a real problem for people, or maybe enabling a real opportunity. It's a sticky experience, and then when the time comes, you want them to stay with your platform, upgrade the experience, maybe expand their use. And I think in this kind of repeating life cycle, you can measure success in terms of whether your users are getting sustained engagement and value out of the product experience. But there's the other side of this, and we probably all experience this. from one time or another. You get a product, it's not quite what you hoped it would be. You kind of you're sort of disappointed. It's definitely not a Christmas morning experience, maybe. And then so maybe you return it right away, but maybe you stay with it, suffer a little bit, give up, or maybe you stay with it a little more. Get on the phone with the support people, and other people are flooding support. That can turn into like bad reputation on social media, down rating, maybe ultimately go after the competition. I mean, this is sort of the bad cycle. So obviously, in this situation, the only people left at the end of the day are the martyrs who just kind of suffer in silence, not what anybody wants. We want to make sure that we do better. Now, we've talked mainly about the human and business impact of design, which, as we've seen, can be considerable, but there's also a financial business case too. There's measurable financial value to investing in design. DMI, the Design Management Institute, has 6 criteria that they use to evaluate whether an organization is a design-centric organization. And they've tracked the performance of the stock price of public companies who are design-oriented. They run their design value index. These are public companies like Apple, Herman Miller, Intuit. And what they found is that over time, over the last few years, those design-driven organizations have outperformed the S&P 500 by more than 200%. So it makes a difference. This IoT market is a large and growing market. It's estimated to be a $1 trillion market within a couple years, which puts it on par with the GDP of New York State. So there's a massive opportunity. And I think that companies that are doing things right have an opportunity to capture a significant portion of this market. There's the opportunity to differentiate on user experience and design. So what are some takeaways from today? We talked about how you can think of connectivity as a new material for traditional product manufacturers, how to design with connectivity as a way to enhance the value and experience of their products. Even the simplest IoT products have multiple stakeholders, as we've seen. And then each one of them, I think, will probably have different needs. We'll probably want different visualizations of data to serve those needs. Then building on Maslow's hierarchy, we talked about the 5 critical components of successful user experience to think about. Then thinking about the human factor of understandability and trust with that Tesla and the Nest examples that David showed. I think that the lesson that I see is make sure that your product is not a black box, even if there's a lot of sophisticated intelligence inside of it. People need to understand the product's mental model in order to trust it, and sometimes even to, if you can, help them understand what the machine is thinking. And I think as IoT products start to mature and talk more to each other, the design challenges are going to increasingly shift to how to aggregate services and data holistically. So we're going to open the panel to questions in a moment. And as we do that, maybe we'll ask you to think about what challenges you're facing with products that you're working on or that you're involved with. So if you haven't already, please submit any questions you have through the questions panel. You can go to webinar. And Emily, I think we're seeing some questions.
Yeah, so we've got a few questions coming in. I'll start with a question from Sindora. It's regarding the glow cap. He says, I love the idea of the glow cap, but I'm wondering how it might work for patients who don't have access to internet or a 3G network.
Yeah, I'll take that. The glow cap itself has a wireless chip inside that talks to the night light. So you can have up to 12 glow caps that can talk to the same night light. They all have different colors on the top, so you can figure out like this is for your once a day med and this is for your twice a day med. And the night light has a 3G modem inside that talks to a cellular network. So you don't need Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or anything within the home. You just need to not live in Alaska. So so you have to have some cell phone connectivity around. Although one of the interesting design challenges was how do you, if someone has marginal connectivity, how do you indicate that? You don't, and we decided that we should only alert people if it fails multiple times. So the first time the signal comes from the cap and travels across to the nightlight, and then from the nightlight up to the cloud, and the urgency for that data to get up to the cloud is actually pretty low, right? Because if you have a 2-hour dosing window, if you will, like it could try in 10 seconds and then another 10 seconds and then another 10 seconds. And we don't want to show people like it dialing and failing and dialing and failing, if you will. So we gave it the opportunity to connect many times before we'd signal to them that that they had poor reception, which we did through a color which was on the outside of that ring.
Yeah, and actually, I think for me it raises some interesting design questions, which is to what extent do you want the device itself? And I think that you guys did a tremendous opportunity using the hub to not just be like a kind of just a dumb piece of hardware. I mean, it itself has an expressive quality to it that can convey information. So it makes it a little less dependent on, say, an app or some other means to communicate with the user.
Yeah, we really, as a design community, we haven't really come up with sort of the lingua franca of indication, like blinky light indications of what's going on. So we started off with a glow cap thinking like, oh, it should be green to take your pill and red to like if you have taken the pill. But then people thought, well, oh, maybe the red means to stop and not do an action. So we came up with blue if it's chill and you shouldn't do anything, and then orange if something is required of you. So we tried to avoid stoplight, the sort of stoplight palette entirely.
It's funny how like the mental model can come in different ways, just like trying to orient you to just like some kind of mnemonic that helps you understand the colors.
Yeah, I don't know. I recently got a pair of Bose headphones, the QC30s or 35s. And it's interesting how they use voice to indicate battery level. Because they might have used a blinky light, which is what they did in the previous one. Like it's solid green if it's enough battery, and then it starts blinking slowly as the battery depletes, and then it blinks fast. But then if the light's off, of course the battery has depleted. Sorry. But they made the choice in this one to when you turn it on, it says battery 95%. And I don't know. What do you like? Do you think that's too verbose,
it's
or
funny.
is
I have those same
is it
headphones.
comforting?
It's very funny you bring this up because just in the last few days, I never came with the latest update, but in the app there's a way to turn off the voice prompt. Because I just felt like I was constantly getting interrupted with those voice prompts.
Right.
But then it became a little too mute. It was like, oh, it was nice to know they would tell me.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what it's an interesting design challenge.
I think it may be that we need to design products that sort of mature over time. So maybe in the first 10 days, it has the voice prompt, and then has some other faster, subtle prompt that's being taught to you, and then over time you sort of learn what the shorthand is. Any other questions?
Yes. Okay, so our next question is coming from James. Thank you, James, for your question. He wants to know, when you're working with customers or clients, what's your process to align on a design decision?
Okay, great question. And that actually kind of gets to process and maybe even sort of design culture, which we didn't really have a chance to talk too much about today. But I think that, first off, I'll say that before you make any design decisions, you really want to do some research and understand who is the person that you're designing for? What is the problem you're trying to help them solve? So that involves discovery and definitely some user research. But I think that when you start to get into a design process, and we recommend starting with a conceptual design process, designing at a level of abstraction first before you get into very specific design decisions, because it's a conceptual design that establishes the mental model. But at each step of the way, I think of design as a heuristic process. You make a sketch. You make a design proposal, and then you test it with people. Maybe with your colleagues, maybe with your client, with your team, putting out to as close as possible to putting out to people who are actually going to be the real users of it. And I think that's really the only way to tell, because I think years of experience in design can give you some guidance about what you think is going to work, but you really never know for sure. And I think your example, David, about trying different colors is a great example. We might think like, oh, that's universal. Everybody would understand green a certain way. But what you find is that people think about different things differently. There are cultural differences. People understand things differently in different contexts and at different times. So I think it's really try something, get ideas out there, and then cycle it through testing and feedback.
Yeah, I think when we're working with a graphic designer, you're used to seeing like 5 options, or
ish.
Mm-hmm.
But working with industrial design or interaction design, we typically don't have the discipline to spin up 5 or more parallel solutions. And I try to get students and others that I work with to really like come up with what you think is the best one, and then really put it aside and try to do another one, and really put it aside and try to do another one, and make them sacrificial, and don't fall in love with them, which is so hard to do when you're inventing something. And sort of reserve judgments until you put it in front of people. And it's almost sad to think about how many iterations it usually takes in order to make something that is as refined as it needs to be. Like right now, I'm doing this project at Warby Parker where we're working on helping you get a eyeglasses test, a visual acuity test using your phone. And boy, we've been testing that every week for about 6 months, and we're still learning new things. And it's it's just it takes so many iterations.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's. I mean, you can look at it as like, oh, like it's kind of it's rough. The design takes so long. I mean, but I think the Warby example that you just described is one where you're doing something that hasn't really been done before. So you're when you're kind of breaking new ground design-wise, you're going to be learning a lot, I think. I mean, when you can leverage a metaphor that or something that builds on something that people are already familiar with. Then it's more of an incremental design change, and maybe there's a little more, foundation for it. But I think that, I mean, one other thing that I think this speaks to is not just process, but design culture. And I think that setting expectations that it is going to take cycles to get to something that's really good. And that allows you to work out the kinks, and that people really shouldn't expect that their designs are going to get praised. that you put a design out there, and hey, it's a straw man. I mean, you start with real straw man because let's tear it apart and learn. But every step of the way, it's like, okay, it's an opportunity to learn. And I think getting that into the design culture of an organization is really, really helpful. Because I see organizations that don't have that, and they get very attached to designs even when they're not working well, and they have trouble moving beyond that.
One of the things, not to just pour praise on you, Mark, publicly, but one of the things that I really, really love about working with your team especially, is I think you understand how you have to keep doing, you call it turns, like let's do another turn, let's do another turn. And you sort of just realize, like, I would give you feedback on that, on the vitality, like, single number index idea, and you'd be like, okay, fine, we'll do another turn, So there wasn't this, like, I didn't feel like I was being shoehorned into this, like, oh, I only get 3 revs, but I think you should just understand that design takes iteration, and you're sort of willing to do it.
Well, design is a partnership, and I think that we always look for folks like yourself. I mean, you're a perfect example of that. But people in organizations that really are investing in it, they really understand the value of it, and they actually, I find that a lot of the people that we work with actually really enjoy the process because they're learning things about a world that they probably know very, very well. They've been living in that vertical, say, or with that product space, and it's an opportunity to take a step back, think about things a little differently, and really kind of move things forward and engage some new possibilities. So I think that's, when you can bring that spirit to the engagement, really, really valuable.
Okay, so I guess that's all the time we have for questions today, but remember that you're going to get a follow-up email with a survey. So if you didn't get your question answered during this session, you'll have the opportunity to ask us, and we'll follow up via email. So thank you again for everyone for coming out, and we hope that you found the session valuable, and we hope that you'll follow up with us afterward. If you're dealing with some design challenge in IoT, we'd encourage you to reach out to the team. We bring a lot of experience in the IoT space, and we'd be happy to talk to you about your product anytime. And come and visit us in Boston. We're at the Cambridge Innovation Center. And please stay connected with us on social media, and stay tuned for the next Design for Data webinar. Thanks to everyone for coming.